Dr. Timothy Dukes, a depth psychologist, and one of the early classes from Pacifica in clinical psychology. I was one of the early graduates. And currently, I consult with teams of people, executives mainly, and have a long history of just being fascinated by what it takes to be a present parent. I wrote a book called Present Parenting. My dissertation was on present fathering, and so that's been a thread that's run through both my clinical practice and now my consulting practice. And the course we're offering uh, will take the participants, I think, into what's relevant for them as parents and parenting their children. But also, if you work with parents or you work with children, it also will support you in getting a deeper recognition of your particular way of being present for the child. Well, first of all, when I speak about parenting, I think of it as what's called pointing to instruction. So, in other words, I don't assume that I know what I'm talking about. Okay. But I point to what I see. And that's in this interview, in terms of the teaching, in terms of my work, that's what I do. Because I can trust what I see and what I experience, but I don't want that to be to the exclusion of the person I'm in dialogue with. So the basis of depth, parenting in depth, from my viewpoint, is it's helpful to think of it as a ongoing dialogue between you and your child. And that begins pre-birth. That every single nuanced thought, every feeling, every breath you take in relationship to your child will be part of I think of it as grace, honestly, that brings them into this world. So everything we do impacts the child. So is there a blueprint? Do our children born with the blueprint? I really don't know. Um, I do know they have, how would I say it, a unique determination to be in this lifetime. And from my viewpoint, parenting in depth is about supporting that determination. And I'm going to read, I have a story I just thought I might share that speaks to that. And this comes from Thomas More, his book, Care of the Soul. And it's the story of an Inuit carver who sits in the translucent light of his igloo and turns the unworked walrus ivory lightly in his bronzed and narrowed hands. He whispers, "Who are you? Who hides within?" He turns it slightly, and then in a moment of stillness, he breathes, "Ah, you're a whale." He carves lightly with respect. The carver helps the whale come forth. It is not created, but released. The carver does not control the ivory, but blends with it. He participates in whaleness. The ivory whale embodies the essential of a pattern that connects with his senses, his intuition, his tradition. The carving was not made from a flat surface because it is not made to be viewed in a stationary perspective. Now, the story goes on for another paragraph. I won't share that right at this moment. But if you think about carving with respect, in a sense, you participate with your child in such a way that you ensure that their unique character emerges. And that has to do with an ability to listen, to be still, to listen, and from my viewpoint, to trust that entity, that being 100%, because they are always communicating. Yeah, if the intentional teaching is communicates 10 bits of data, the subconscious, the unconscious, subliminal teaching communicates about 1,000. So one really valuable thing to understand, and if you don't experience it, then you could try believing it or trusting that it might be true, is that everything we think, everything we feel, everything that transpires in our body-mind system, particularly in the if there's partnership in parenting the child, that relational entity, all of that is communicated to the child. And it's not communicated verbally. There's research, and it's not my field, so I'll speak about it. I'm not going to be held responsible for it, but the current research, which really understands that the left hemisphere, the instinctual, symbolic part of the brain of the generally the mother, even beginning in utero, but it can be the primary caregiver as well, that left hemisphere not only communicates with the left hemisphere of the baby, but literally they're the same, that they resonate and carry exchange of information for the first 2.5 years of life. Meanwhile, the right hemisphere is pretty much dormant, and it waits until like this 2.5, 3 years when it comes online in a very big way as well. So that information transfer happens whether we want it to happen or not. So it's so important is going toward congruency. So if you're frustrated and you're tired, your child already knows it. Now they may not be able to interpret it as an infant, but they know you weren't that way 10 minutes ago. Something shifted and they'll begin to respond to it. And there that information exchange, that loop of communication is the idea is to try to have your intention as much aligned with the truth of what you're experiencing is as you can. Yeah, yeah, boy, once you start that level of engagement with the parent-child relationship, if you're coming in as a practitioner, um, you're dealing with really a cacophony of dynamics. You're dealing with the individual parent, possibly the parent relationship, if they're two parenting people. You're dealing with the relationship between that parent and the child, let's say, or the children. You're also dealing with the phantom parenting, grandparenting, the embodied parents of your client, so their parents. And often, but depending on I think the cultural aspects, sometimes you actually go back generationally, um, because there are people who have it's almost tribal in their connections. They haven't lost their uh, lineage. Um, like where I live, they I was on a boat recently with somebody, and we were talking, and he said, I said to him, "Are you from here?" And he goes, "Yeah." I go, "How? Your parents from here?" He goes, "Oh yeah, we're all from here." I go, "What do you mean?" How far back can you go? And he said, 5, 6 generations. And I said, "You, no." You actually, he says, "Yeah, I actually know their names. And I know the stories and the narratives." So let's just say you have a client who's that informed by generational influences. And they're like the pivot point that all that generational influence pivot flows through them, but then it also goes into the child or children. And whatever challenges they're facing, there could be, uh, it could just be normal challenges that you've helped facilitate, or there could be trauma. And if it's generational trauma, that's going to present itself in that context. So how does depth help? Recognizing that level of information that will come into play in the session. The beauty of depth is that you can trust it. If you hold a process and you can regulate the process with your client, theoretically at least, you can to some degree regulate the information coming out of the unconscious and build in methodology so that the client can integrate that effectively into their individual psyches, but also into their relationships with their children. So it's a real privilege I mean, I've done a lot of that in my clinical practice over 40 years, um, to be invited into that because it's so complex and humbling for me. I can remember starting to work with parents and couples where most of my work had been individual work. And sometimes the couple would leave and I would just like cry because even though I was trained, really well trained, I had no idea what to do. Right. And it's the process of, in the same way with parenting, you want to learn about how to be an effective parent. Well, the learning comes in the doing, right? And our children will teach us how to be effective parents. And in a real way, this may not be politically correct, but I think our clients teach us how to guide them if we listen. They will tell the practitioner what they need, and if you're that person, you can then adapt your services, your expertise, your gifts in such a way to support them.